They were some of the most experienced hikers in the Soviet Union. Trained, certified, and prepared for the brutal conditions of the Ural Mountains. Led by Igor Dyatlov, this was a team that did everything right. They planned their route, cached their supplies, and set up a professional camp. Yet, on a night in February 1959, something so terrifying occurred that it forced these experts to slash their way out of their own tent and walk, not run, into a minus 30-degree abyss without shoes or coats. Today, we're breaking down the Dyatlov Pass incident, the mystery where 9 hikers died, and no explanation seems to make sense. Before we continue, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel, and let's dive into how this story really began. They were not beginners. This was a high-level expedition. It was led by Igor Dyatlov, a 23-year-old radio engineering student who carefully selected his team from the Ural Polytechnical Institute. In total, there were 10 members at the start, 8 men and 2 women. Every single one of them was experienced, already holding Grade 2 hiking certification and aiming to complete a Category 3 expedition, which at the time required covering around 300 kilometers in harsh terrain. This was the highest level of difficulty available. Their route had already been approved by the Sverdlovsk City Committee of Physical Culture and Sport on January 8, 1959. The plan was clear: travel deep into the northern Ural Mountains and reach Torton, a remote peak. The group officially set out on January 23rd, but 5 days later, on January 28th, one member, Yuri Yudin, turned back due to serious joint pain and health issues. That decision would unknowingly save his life. The remaining 9 continued forward, fully aware of the risks. These were trained individuals who understood extreme weather, navigation, and survival. Nothing about their preparation suggested panic, inexperience, or poor judgment. But despite all that preparation, something ahead broke even this highly skilled group. After leaving the last inhabited settlement of Vijay, the group moved deeper into isolation. On January 25th, they had arrived at Ivdel by train, then continued by truck, before beginning their trek on January 27th toward Torton. By January 31st, they reached the edge of a highland area and made a calculated move. They cached extra food and equipment in a wooded valley, planning to use it on their return. Everything still followed a clear, organized plan. But on February 1st, the conditions began to shift. Snowstorms intensified and visibility dropped. As they moved through the mountain pass, they lost their direction and drifted west, climbing toward the slope of Katabatic instead of staying on the safer route. When they realized the mistake, they faced a critical choice. Instead of descending about 1.5 kilometers into a forested area that could offer shelter from the wind, they decided to set up camp directly on the exposed slope. It was a decision made under pressure, with fading light and worsening weather. The mountain itself carried an unsettling meaning. Katabatic translates to dead mountain. At that moment, it was just a name. But soon, it would become something far more real. During the night of February 1st to 2nd, everything changed. The group had set up their tent on the slope, but what happened next remains one of the most disturbing parts of this case. The tent was later found cut open from inside. That single detail raised more questions than answers. This wasn't damage from outside. It meant the hikers themselves made the decision to escape quickly. Outside, the conditions were brutal. Temperatures dropped between minus 25 degrees Celsius to minus 30 degrees Celsius, with strong winds and a snowstorm sweeping across the slope. Despite that, the group left behind almost everything: shoes, gear, and proper winter clothing. Some of them stepped out wearing only socks, a single shoe, or even barefoot. What makes this even stranger is what came next. 9 sets of footprints were found leading away from the tent. As heading toward a forest about 1.5 kilometers away, the tracks showed no signs of panic. They were not running. They were walking in a controlled manner into freezing darkness. There were no signs of other people nearby. No struggle. No clear threat visible in the snow. They left their only shelter by choice, but whatever pushed them out was strong enough to make them face the cold instead. The search didn't begin immediately. It wasn't until February 20th that rescue teams were sent out. after no message was received by the expected return date. 6 days later, on February 26th, they found the campsite. The tent was described as half torn down and covered with snow. It was empty and almost all belongings were still inside. Following the footprints, searchers reached the edge of a forest about 1.5 kilometers away. There, under a large Siberian pine, they found the first 2 bodies. Both were shoeless, dressed only in underwear, lying near the remains of a small fire. The branches of the tree were broken up to 5 meters high, suggesting someone had climbed it, possibly to look back toward the camp or search for danger. Between that tree and the tent, 3 more bodies were discovered. They were found at distances of 300, 480, and 630 meters from the forest. Their position suggested something chilling. They were trying to return to the tent, but never made it. The pattern was clear. They had left together, but now they were falling, one by one, in the freezing darkness. And deeper in the forest, the final discovery raised even more disturbing questions. It took more than 2 months to find the remaining 4 hikers. On May 4th, their bodies were discovered under about 4 meters of snow in a ravine, roughly 75 meters further into the woods from the pine tree. Unlike the others, these 4 were better dressed. There were clear signs that some clothing had been taken from those who had died earlier, suggesting an effort to survive longer in the freezing conditions. But what stood out were the injuries. 1 had major skull damage. 2 had severe chest trauma. The level of force needed was described as comparable to a car crash. Yet, there were no visible external wounds that match such impact. It didn't look like a typical fall or accident. The condition of the bodies raised even more questions. Some had severe soft tissue damage to the head and face. 1 was missing a tongue, eyes, part of the lips, and facial tissue. Another had missing eyeballs. These details were disturbing, but the location of the bodies in running water suggested some of this damage may have happened after death. Still, the combination of deep internal injuries and minimal external signs didn't fit a simple explanation. Something powerful had happened out there, but what kind of force leaves damage like that without a clear cause? A legal inquest began soon after the first bodies were recovered. Early examinations showed that several of the hikers had no injuries that could explain their deaths, leading to a clear conclusion for many of them. 6 of the 9 died from hypothermia. The remaining 3 died from fatal physical trauma. It was also determined that they had died 6 to 8 hours after their last meal. There were no signs of other people in the area. No additional footprints were found beyond the 9 hikers. The tracks suggested they had left the campsite on their own, on foot, without force. This ruled out many direct attack theories early on. Still, there were details that didn't sit right. Some levels of radiation were found on 1 victim's clothing. The tent had been cut open from the inside, and despite the extreme injuries seen on some bodies, there were no clear external marks to match the force behind them. In the end, the case was closed with a vague explanation. The group had died due to a compelling natural force. No specific cause was officially named. No one was held responsible. The files were sealed away in a secret archive, and that unclear ending only made people question what was really being left out. Decades later, the case was reopened. In 2019, authorities took another look, this time focusing on natural explanations. By 2020, the official conclusion pointed toward one main cause, an avalanche, more specifically a type known as a slab avalanche. The idea was simple, but serious. A buildup of snow above the tent slowly shifted during the night, putting pressure on the campsite. The group had set their tent on an open slope, and earlier digging into the snow may have weakened the surface. When the snow above began to move, it likely created cracks and heavy pressure against the tent. With the entrance blocked, the hikers cut their way out from inside and moved downhill about 1.5 kilometers toward the forest, searching for safety. Their actions after leaving the tent started to make more sense under this explanation. They built a fire, attempted to create shelter, and some tried to return to the tent. A 2021 scientific study supported this idea, showing that even a small slab of moving snow could cause injuries similar to those found. But even this explanation didn't answer everything. The footprints showed controlled movement, not panic, and the location raised questions about whether such an avalanche was even likely. So even the most accepted answer, or still leaves gaps that are hard to ignore. Because the official explanation never closed every gap, Other theories continued to grow. One idea focused on extreme weather. Wind speeds on that night were estimated at 20 to 30 meters per second, strong enough to create dangerous conditions. A sudden Katabatic wind could have forced the group to abandon the tent and move toward the forest for protection. Another theory suggested something less visible. Infrasound, created by wind moving across the mountain, may have caused panic and confusion. This could explain why the hikers left their shelter in such a controlled but urgent way, even without a visible threat. Then there were reports from that same period. Witnesses, including people in nearby areas, described seeing strange orange spheres in the sky between February and March 1959. This led to speculation about military activity. Records confirmed that parachute mines were being tested in the region, and these devices could cause strong internal injuries without leaving clear external marks. There were also smaller details. Some clothing showed traces of radiation. Some of the hikers removed or exchanged clothing, possibly due to a known effect of hypothermia called paradoxical undressing. Each theory explains part of the story, but none of them explain everything. And that's why this case still stands as one of the most unsettling mysteries ever recorded. 9 lives were lost in a place where survival depended on every decision. They had the skills, the plan, and the discipline to complete a journey few could attempt. Yet something on that mountain broke that control in a matter of hours. Even after decades, the full picture still feels incomplete, like a story missing its final piece. Whether it was a freak slab avalanche or a military test gone wrong, the names of the Dyatlov 9 are now etched into history. So what do you think really happened that night? And if you were in their place, would you have made a different choice? If you have your own theory on what happened that night on Dead Mountain, let's discuss it in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like, subscribe for more, and stay safe. Thanks for watching.